So the Seven Summits project, it began with a book a friend of mine had given me, titled The Seven Summits, and it was written by arguably the first two who completed the Seven Summits, Frank Wells and Dick Bass. And they had started the project in the early 1980s and completed in 1985. And they had written this book, which just really was spellbinding for me, just the adventures and the challenges that they had going around the world and solving all these problems logistically, how to get to some of these places and get your gear and equipment and all the permits and things that had to happen. And then it was after Monica and I were married, we had always thought we'd do a honeymoon to Nepal. That didn't work out, but within the first year of marriage we were able to finally pull things together, and Horizon arranged for some time off for us, and we were able to go out and trek in Nepal up through the Khumbu Valley and get up to Everest Base Camp. And it was at that point, up at the high point of our trek, looking across the valley down towards the base camp of Everest, the ice fall, and the summit pyramid, the typical place where you see most pictures taken of the Everest summit is from this place called Kalapatar. And it was at that place that looking out across the way and seeing that big summit pyramid, and I thought, boy, that just speaks to me, and I really would like to go for that. And Monica was there, and she says, well, you got to follow your dreams, so go for it.
Behind us there is Mount St. Helens. Further on up is Mount Rainier, Mount Adams. Then just in front of the left wing is Mount Hood. We're proceeding direct to Mount Jefferson.
The first of the Seven Summits was, for myself, was Mount Vinson in Antarctica. And it's just over 16,000 feet, 16,023 feet.
Antarctica isn't like scheduled air service. There's this outfit called Adventure Network International. They had found a DC-6 that they were flying from Punta Arenas to go down to a place in the middle of Antarctica called Patriot Hills. Patriot Hills was like a big lake. Of course, it's Antarctica, it's frozen, it's hard blue water ice, and so you can land a wheeled vehicle there, so you don't have to have an airplane that takes off out of South America on wheels and has to convert to skis to land in Antarctica. So you can have an unmodified airplane to make that all come together.
First ascent was actually my childhood hero, my mentor, and to this day he's still alive and he's doing a lot of work down there in Antarctica. His name is John Evans. He went to college with my father, and I just think the world of him. And Mount Vinson at 80 degrees south latitude, and it's as close as I think that I'll ever be to being on another planet. It's everything that you see in Antarctica, at least inland, away from any of the oceans. There's no animal life, no birds or anything like that. And you'll see 4 colors in the natural environment. You'll see blue, black, white, and gray, and any other color is man-made. And there are no other sounds unless you have wind, which happens quite a bit. But when it's calm, it is so quiet, it's like being in a soundproof closet somewhere. Your ears ring all the time.
The summit of Mount Vincent. You can see the ski pole left by famous British explorer Chris Bonington 3 years prior when he summited with Dick Bass and Frank Wells during the first 7 Summits adventure. Based upon all the early planning within Horizon, one of my goals was to highlight how cool this little airline was and how it would allow people to pursue their dreams and goals. A way to note this would be to show the Horizon meatball logo on all of the 7 summits. Back into our high camp at Camp 3, and I suddenly got an idea to take a photo of myself. My little Olympus camera was a point-and-shoot film camera, and I had no idea if the selfie would work. Even though our water bottles were insulated, they were frozen solid after 14 hours of climbing. Fortunately, the frozen ice on my mustache could be bitten off in little chunks to provide a little hydration throughout the day. If you think it's water, but it's not. The trailhead leading up to Aconcagua in South America begins at a place in Argentina called Puente del Inca, the Inca's Bridge. At Puente del Inca is a natural hot spring that is really special. Even Charles Darwin stopped by for a visit in 1835. At one time there was a very nice spa built around the hot spring. Unfortunately, it was mostly wiped out by an avalanche years ago, but the natural hot tub was saved. As has probably been the tradition for many years, climbers returning from the mountain soak in the hot tub and aspiring summiters listen to stories about the mountain. Day 1 of the climb. 4 of us set out for Aconcagua. On this trip, 2 of us are clients. On the left is Daniel Hirsch, also known as Gugu, who becomes a very dear family friend over the years. The lead guide with the poles over his head is Daniel Bariza, and the assistant guide is Mauricio. Gugu with the first sight of Aconcagua above and to the right of his head, barely visible in the shot. We have 26 miles to go. Finally, a clear view of Aconcagua. Our route will be up the left face. Our first night on the trail was at a natural hot spring where the mules could drink and eat. The mule driver was a father and son team. It was really fun to watch the father pass along his experience to his son, a time-honored tradition. Finally at Plaza de Mulas, base camp at 14,000 feet. A nice benefit of having mule support was that each of us had our own tent at base camp. We set up 3 camps above base camp. This was Camp 1 at 16,500 feet, known as Camp Cañada. Lead guide Daniel Bariza is on the radio with base camp to get a weather forecast. Note all of the boot liners hanging from the ceiling. The goal is to allow the boot liners to dry every evening so your feet will be in a dry and relatively warm boot the next morning. After a while, you don't notice the smell. On summit day near the top of the crux of the climb, this is looking down on a place that must have been designed in hell. This gully is called the Canaleta and is about 2,000 vertical feet of large loose rocks that roll and tumble on one another. This is a self-timer shot of us leaving high camp known as Camp Berlin at 19,400 feet. It was a beautiful clear day with winds blowing about 50 miles per hour. We had 3,500 vertical feet ahead of us this summit day. The summit survey marker on top of Aconcagua. The summit was first reached in January 1897. The Horizon Meatball Flag on 7 Summits number 2. Antarctica was December 2nd, 1990. South America, December 15th, 1990. A 7 Summit tradition was to bury a family photo at each summit. In the early days, it was just Monica and myself. After so much planning, training, and effort, the summits became a very emotional place for me. Another 7 Summit tradition was to collect rocks and samples of summit snow. Looking back on this tradition now, it gives me strength during quiet times in my office to look at the summit bottles. You are looking at a very happy, smelly, and motivated climber who has achieved all of the goals for this trip and now wants to get home to his wife before Christmas. Total trip time will be about 6 weeks. Back in Miami, in a very happy reunion with Monica at the airport. Fortunately, I had stowed my clothes away from the climbing clothes, and I had at least 1 clean pair of skivvies. Monica said I didn't smell too bad at this point. She changed her mind after we finally got home and opened up the duffel bags.
Training preparation, in particular, in those early years, Rick Smith turned out to be the most ultimate training partner. He was in really good shape. He was doing marathons and doing triathlons, the Alcatraz, where your boat takes you out to Alcatraz Island, you jump off the boat and swim back to San Francisco and then ride a bike for 15 or whatever it was and run 15 miles, and he was in great shape. He was doing a lot of training, and we'd go out and ride bikes Wednesday evenings with, at the time, the chief pilot in the Metroliner was Tom Gerharder, lives in Northeast Portland. We'd ride out into the West Hills, and we'd be out there. One of us would get a flat tire in the middle of the rain, and they wouldn't have their flashlight on you, so you could patch the tire and press on. And it was a lot of good, clean fun, and pushing really hard up the hills, and just don't stop. That was the only thing. Just don't come to a stop. Keep riding your bike, keep pedaling. Doesn't matter how slow you're going, but keep pedaling no matter how hard you're breathing. And those were some really, really good days.
When the Kilimanjaro climb was being planned, originally my wife Monica, she was at the time working part-time with a travel agency in the town of Camas, and so Monica set up a trip for an RTW with British Air. For only an extra $700 per person, positive space, you could ride the Concorde from JFK to Heathrow, and of course that took about a nanosecond to decide if that was worth it or not. As soon as we sat down, the cabin service began. So immediately out of nowhere came glasses of champagne and caviar. The purser comes back with my ID saying, "Excuse me, sir, the captain has invited you to the flight deck for the takeoff. If you will come with me, please." My wife Monica's looking at me like, "I can't believe you're going to go do this." Kilimanjaro in Africa, it's 19,340 feet. And it's actually, if you think about our own Mount St. Helens, it's got a crater rim, and then along that jagged rim there's obviously the highest point, and that's what Uhuru Peak is, the highest point. But most of the perimeter is a little bit lower than that, and the name of the point where our climbing route topped out on the rim itself is a place called Gilman's Point, which was at 18,600 feet. The climb itself it begins at about 6,000 feet above sea level, where you're into the official national park itself, the Kilimanjaro Park. And it's required by the government that every climber has a porter to carry their gear. It provides jobs for the local community, and they are really, really excellent at doing their work. It's fascinating. You think about struggling with loads in your backpack, and you watch these people carrying on top of their head, balanced on their head, will be a duffel bag that they'll walk up for days as you're making your way up in altitude. You're climbing through several different climatic zones on the mountain, from, as you would expect, here in the Cascades, you've got the rainforest. You get a little higher, and it's more of alpine trees, and at some point you get above timberline, and Kilimanjaro has many more climatic zones than that, and it's really fascinating to climb up through those. And they all smell different, and every day is just like you're in a different place in the universe. This was an opportunity, given the nature of the climb, that I would be able to have some of my family come along, my mom and dad and my wife Monica, and a very good friend that I had met on the Aconcagua climb. He was able to join us on Kilimanjaro.
Buenos dias!
Leap year.
Just take it real slowly and don't go
We're
ahead.
getting ready on Mount Meru.
Yeah.
Jimmy Carter? Are you kidding? You wouldn't kid your mother, would you?
Are we having fun now?
Oh yeah, it's really fun.
Mom arrives at Marumbo, March 2nd at Mandara Hut. Peter's 42nd birthday. Beautiful day.
Buenos dias, everyone.
How are you, buddy?
All right. He has had today of beer.
Beautiful morning. Camp.
No close-ups. Please. Oh well.
Rumble Hut. Getting ready for the big.
This is wild. Gee, people might think I'm funny or something.
Taking a break. So is he. At 14,500 feet. There's the objective.
Approaching Kibo Hat. This is Perry.
15,000 feet.
Okay.
Sunrise. About 6:30 or so in the morning. Just on the lower left corner, right in the center of the screen actually now. Here's the summit. I was up here at 7:15 a.m. I've been up here about an hour or so since. This is the sacred picture. Brings tears to my eyes.
And REC.
That's it.
Okay, good.
Good work. I'm thinking about you. Oh, Horizon. That's it.
When the concept of the seven summits was kind of rattling around, this was coming back from our first trek in Nepal in May of 1990. At the time, the manager of corporate communications for Horizon, her name was Nancy Pappas, and she was a really, really neat gal. I believe she reported directly to our then president, John Kelly, and she had great ideas and high energy and very receptive to all of this. She wasn't a climber herself, but she was very supportive of it, and that's all I needed to. I was off to the races. So we talked about different concepts, and maybe there is an article in an in-flight magazine or something like that, and it could tie to having a Horizon logo. And somewhere in those discussions, the concept of the flag with the Horizon logo finally came up. And so I was asking in a letter I'd written to Horizon, formally requesting two of these flags, 2 feet by 2.5 feet, and they would be flexible. I could roll them up so I could keep them, in my pack somewhere. And Nancy was able to come up with a flag, and I have had that flag on all the 7 summits and all the 50 summits of the United States that I've been on, and yeah, it's been around the world a couple times, I think.
Everest, or Big E, as some might call it, the highest point in Asia and highest point of all the 7 summits. In the Nepali language, they would call Mount Everest is known as Sagarmatha, which is roughly translated Goddess Mother of the Earth. And in Tibetan, it would be Chomolungma. The early days of the climbers on Everest in the 1920s would actually come up through Darjeeling, India, and cross the Himalaya and approach Everest from the north side, from Tibet. And then once the emperor within Nepal decided to open up the borders, and climbers from England started coming in and assessing routes that would approach Everest from the Nepalese side, from the south side. And that's what began the real serious climbing, just because it was relatively warmer and not as remote. It was faster to get information back and forth from the mountain to civilized society. In those days, you would actually the expedition would start walking from the outermost limits of the city of Kathmandu, a place called Jiri, and it was about 3 weeks of walking to get to a place called Lukla, and then from there they would continue the hike in. Then Lukla, an airport was constructed with a very steep slope, about a 24% grade slope, and that was a 45-minute airplane ride from Kathmandu. So you shaved off 3 weeks each way off the expedition by making your flight into Lukla. And then from Lukla it was about probably 10 days or so of walking from there to get up to Everest Base Camp.
Vern is just going to town here. It's tea time. John and you. This is the mess tent. And it's May 5th. So just over a month to get here. There's Vern.
The aha moment in 1990 when first viewing Everest in person, which began the Seven Summits commitment. The expedition team logo for the 1992 Everest climb with Alpine Ascents International. A porter carrying a generator below Namche. This porter had been carrying this 200-pound generator for weeks from Kathmandu. Yaks are gentle giants in the Himalaya, and they do the heavy lifting in the Khumbu. Bridges are built with materials that can be carried from far away and are used by both yaks and humans. On the second day of hiking above the Lukla airport, you are rewarded with the first view of Everest. A typical lunch stop during the 10-day hike to base camp: toast, noodles, beans, french fries, canned sausages, hot chocolate, and tea. Group photo in base camp of the 1992 Alpine Ascents Summit Sherpa and climbers. Prior to beginning the climb onto the mountain, a traditional ceremony with the Sherpa takes place in base camp called the Puja. It is an opportunity for all team members to celebrate life and recognize the significance of the effort facing the group. Base camp with Vern Tejas and Mike Gordon. Mike and I first met while climbing together on Mount Vincent in Antarctica. Mike owns the famous bar in Anchorage, Chilkoot Charlie's.
A lot of these aluminum ladders are kept down below base camp at a place called Gorik Shep. And so this stockpile of these ladders will be kept in the off season. And then generally in February, the expeditions will have Sherpa teams moving up to pick up the ladders and begin looking at where they're going to put the route into the ice fall. And then in March is when they'll start placing those ladders.
Moving up the western Khum, above Camp 1 towards Camp 2. Sunset view from Camp 2 looking down the western Khum towards base camp. Base camp, sharpening crampons. Camp 3 at 24,500 feet. This is an important camp to provide rest during the long climb from Camp 2 to 4. Camp 3 is the most uncomfortable camp on the mountain. Once climbing above this camp, climbers will begin using oxygen, moving up to Camp 4. This is also the place where Vern Tejas and I started having medical issues with our lungs.
Vern had kept a mason jar full of the stuff that he was coughing out of his lungs just as kind of a memento, and it grossed out even the doctors.
Camp 4 at the South Col, 8,000 meters. Just to be here and see this place with my own eyes was an honor. The balcony, which is where the climbing route reaches the ridgeline leading to the summit. My teammates took this photo during their ascent. Horizon summit flag at the South Col. My case of pulmonary edema has reoccurred, and my priority is to get down to a lower altitude quickly. It would have been a perfect summit day, but if I had climbed to the summit, I wouldn't have survived the return trip to base camp. Traditional summit family photos left to the mountain. Back to the bottom of the icefall a day after leaving Camp 4 where Monica met me. I'm still using oxygen to help me keep my descent speed up. The pulmonary edema cough had returned and I was hacking away big time. It sure was special to be back with my wife again. A photo of Denali taken from Talkeetna, Alaska, May 30, 1993. A fun photo showing some of the zany fun activities Alaskans do in Talkeetna. Climb gear preparation at the Talkeetna airport the day before departure. Looking over the pilot's shoulder as we approach Denali Base Camp at about 6,000 feet. Notice the one airplane on the ground. It has a bent wing after being ground looped several days before. It took several flights to get all of our gear for 3 weeks and 10 climbers onto the mountain. Fellow Horizon Captain Tom Daniel and I are set up at base camp. A typical camp scene with snow blocks stacked around our tents to protect from wind and driving snow. Cutting snow blocks tended to be a full-time job. Moving up the steep face between the 14,000 and 16,000 foot camps. Because of the steep terrain above 14,000 feet, we could no longer drag sleds, which meant everything had to be carried in backpacks, which is another way to say the loads were heavy. During one of our many climbs up the steep face carrying loads, here's Tom making his famous ugly face. Bradford's Thumb, climbing just above the 16,000 foot camp. On the ridgeline between 16,000 and 17,000 foot camps, Tom Daniel is waving to my camera. This particular section of Denali is one of my favorites. Looking down at where we had come from, the picture was taken from the 17,000 foot camp looking down at the 14,000 foot advanced base camp and the Kahiltna Glacier that we had been climbing up for the past 2 weeks. Above the 17,000 foot camp is the summit route. As we arrived into camp, the weather was beautiful, but it soon degraded into a whiteout. Our climbing team would soon be wondering if we were able to reach the summit. If you don't like the weather, wait 5 minutes. Summit day. After a bad weather day, we had dinner in a storm, and at 9 p.m. the weather cleared. At 10 p.m. we decided to go for it. Since it was June in Alaska, it never gets very dark. The shot was taken at about 6 a.m., June 16th, 1993. Looking above Priyut Hut towards the summit of Mount Elbrus in Russia. During the winter, a series of gondolas carry skiers up to 11,000 feet on the ski area. It appeared that there was more rust than paint on these vehicles, lots of creaking going on. Above the gondolas was a single-seat chairlift that would take you to the highest point of the mountain available by lift. Above the chairlift, it was all up to you. Approaching the Priyut Hut at 13,000 feet, this high camp was constructed by the Russians in the 1930s as a place that Soviet climbers could stay while developing climbing skills. It was covered in aluminum and looked like an Airstream trailer. Climbers out for an acclimatization hike above the Priyut Hut at 13,000 feet. Inside Priyut, it seemed like almost every nationality in the world was there. It reminded me of the Cantina Bar in the movie Star Wars. A closer view of the Priyut Hut. Sadly, the place burned down a few years later. The trail to the summit can be seen on the left side moving up through the rocks. Summit Day, the highest point on the European tectonic plate. Mount Elbrus, Russia, looking back from near the summit on our approach towards the top. Returning from the summit, my Russian guide Alexei and I made the round trip in 6 hours. The climbing team on our second attempt that required 17 legs of flying round trip from Portland. You can see how hot and humid it was in Indonesia by the back of one climber's shirt. One of several legs in a twin otter. Everything is okay. A typical day in Indonesia. Mom, dad, the kids, and groceries all on a scooter. Who needs a minivan? A market scene in a village on the north side of Papua New Guinea, the town of Inuratoli. Kids in Inuratoli, the jumping off place on the north side of the island towards Karsten's Pyramid. A regular scene at the local airport, pigs crossing. The final leg to Karsten's base camp via helicopter. The 2 climbers who returned after the previous year's failed attempt, Dianette and Perry, are on the first helicopter with their summit day to follow the next day. Karsten's base camp view as we prepare to land at 13,000 feet. Breakfast at base camp on summit day. Dave Morton, our guide, is briefing us on the route. The climb begins at the base of the face around 4 a.m. This photo was actually taken on the descent in clear weather and shows the actual summit. Moist ocean and jungle air makes for frequent clouds and downpours, so seeing the whole mountain in the clear is a rare sight. Midway up the mountain, you can see the protective gloves that we wear. The limestone rock is textured like shark skin and very abrasive to bear skin. We are getting close to the summit ridgeline. The climbing is fantastic. Terrific hand and footholds. With good weather, we're moving quickly and easily. Arguably the crux of the climb, there's a little bit of an overhang with a 5'9" pitch to climb. Since there are only 3 of us on the mountain this day, we can take our time. With larger groups, the climbers will rely on a fixed rope and Jumar the way up this face. Horizon Meatball on the summit. Traditional family photos left on the summit. Days later, back in civilization and the beach, it was truly happy hour. Back home at PDX with my family there, I love the green carpet. Our daughters Heidi and Amy at the Steve Irwin Zoo in Australia en route to climb the 7th summit, Mount Kosciuszko. Flying the Qantas Q400 from Sydney to Canberra, truly first-class service. Mount Kosciuszko is at the top of a ski area called Thredbo. The weather made for a perfect climbing day. My entire family came along to summit with me. Mom, Dad, my sister Lynn, Monica, and our 2 daughters. They would ride up the chairlift to a midpoint on the mountain while I raced them hiking up. Ready, set, go. Ascent from a chairlift view. Mom, Dad, and Sister Lynn getting off the chair at mid-mountain. Looking up towards the summit of Mount Kosciuszko, summit 7,308 feet. Mount Kosciuszko summit sign. The last of the 7 summits, my sister found the t-shirt. We popped the cork on a bottle of Dom Perignon champagne to celebrate. Ooh-wee! Family summit photo of a very happy Papa Bear, Mama Bear, and cubs. To my wife who stayed with me through this adventure, to say that she was relieved the 7 were behind me would be a tremendous understatement. Our daughters, Heidi and Amy, got to enjoy their first toast of champagne on this trip. They now each have one of the 7 summits behind them. My parents, Don and Sandra Salmonson, were also quite happy to mark this completion of the 7 summits. Also counting Kilimanjaro, my dad now has 2 of the 7 summits crossed off his list. My sister Lynn and I at the summit marker. Lynn has never been much into climbing, but she made me so happy and proud on this day when she marched right up to the summit and made it look easy. The summit tradition, a family photo left on the summit to think of the places our family's pictures have been. On the descent, racing the chairlift back down the mountain towards Threadbow, Heidi joined me racing everyone down the mountain. That's my girl. A well-deserved family lunch after summiting. And how fitting, at the end of 7 summits, it's time for a family nap.